There's a special kind of silence that comes right after you realize you've been betrayed by your own blood. My name is Louisa Pearl, and my life was built in a dusty garage filled with the smell of walnut and sawdust. That garage held my entire future, $50,000 I'd saved penny by penny to finally build a real business. This morning I went to pay a $500 fee and my account was negative. My life savings, gone. Transferred to my family's failing hardware store. But they didn't just steal my money, they stole it to compete against me for the one prize that could save us both. They thought I was just a hobby. They forgot I was a threat. Stick around to see how it unfolds. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The smell is the first thing that hits you at 5 a.m. It's not just coffee, though. God knows there's plenty of that stale and bitter in my mug. It's the sharp, sweet tang of walnut, the mineral smell of steel wool, and the faint, acidic bite of varnish. This is my world. This is Pearlwood Designs. It's a one-car garage I rent from a guy who's just happy I fixed the leaking roof. The air is so thick with fine dust it glitters in the light of the single bare bulb hanging overhead. My knuckles are split open, raw and red, against the dark oiled wood of the armchair I'm finishing. This isn't a hobby. Hobbies are for people with free time and spare cash. This is a lifeline. This chair, a meticulous hand-carved piece of walnut, is more than just a delivery. It's my application. My real application is for the Founders' Day fair. It's the one chance this town gives you to break out. The grand prize is a $50,000 small business grant and a 10-year low-interest loan. For me, Louisa Pearl, that's not prize money. It's oxygen. It's the key to a real workshop, a storefront with a window, a lease that doesn't depend on a landlord's mood. It's the key to finally escaping this garage, to finally being seen as something other than Art Pearl's quiet daughter. The side door creaks open, and a blast of cold morning air cuts through the sawdust. Elias. He doesn't need to knock. He's holding 2 steaming cups of coffee, the good kind from the diner, and a paper bag. He smiles, his eyes crinkling. Morning, Pearl? He sets the coffee down, his gaze immediately going to the armchair. He's a contractor. He knows wood. He runs a hand over the smooth armrest, his touch respectful. Lou, this is the one. This is it. He believes in me sometimes more than I believe in myself. He sees the business, not the dusty garage. Come on, he says, grabbing one end. Let's get this beast in the truck. You need to get that application in. Our dynamic isn't built on grand gestures but on shared dreams and the quiet reliability of 2x4s. As we load the chair onto his flatbed, my phone buzzes in my pocket. The name on the screen makes my stomach clench. Mom. I wipe my dusty hands on my jeans and answer. Hi, Mom. Louisa, honey. The sigh comes first. It always does. It's a little gust of disappointment, a preface to the guilt. This isn't a check-in, it's a shakedown. Your father is so stressed, honey. You know how Gavin is. I know exactly how Gavin is. Gavin is my older brother, the golden boy, the one who was supposed to take over the family legacy, AG Hardware. A store our father Arthur built from nothing, and Gavin is now driving into the ground with the focused incompetence of a demolition crew. What's he done now, Mom? It's not what he's done, Louisa. It's the pressure. He's trying to save this family. I bite back the retort. I tried to save the family 2 years ago. I remember the $15,000. My inheritance from Grandma Pearl. Money I had hoarded penny by penny to buy my first-year supplies. Gone. Wiped out in a single tearful phone call from Mom Carol to cover Gavin's inventory mistake. I found out a month later from the bartender at the local dive that the inventory mistake was a gambling debt to a bookie from 2 towns over. I never told Elias. The shame was too heavy. Mom? I interrupt, forcing my voice to stay steady. I'm calling you for a reason. I got the chair done. I'm applying for the Founders' Day grant. Oh, that's nice, dear. Your little chairs. The word stings, a tiny familiar poison. Nice. Little. It's not nice, Mom. It's serious. If I get this, it changes everything. But I need help. I steel myself staring at the peeling paint of the garage. The vendor rules say you have to be at the booth for 48 hours straight from setup to teardown. I can't do it alone. Elias is going to help, but he has his own business. I really need you. I need you and Dad. Just for a few hours. Just to watch the booth so I can sleep, or even just go to the bathroom. I can't do this alone. The silence on the other end of the line is a physical thing. It's cold and heavy. I can hear the faint sound of the TV in their living room, the one I bought them last Christmas. I hear her take a breath, not a sigh this time, but a short, sharp inhalation of offense. Then she scoffs, a sound of pure, unadulterated contempt. Louisa, you can't be serious. We're not your employees, Carol, my mother finally says. The contempt in her voice is so sharp it could draw blood. Your father and I have to help Gavin. He's preparing a major presentation for the bank. He is trying to save this family, Louisa. Your little chair hobby can wait. A hobby. The word hangs in the air between the garage and her kitchen, a perfect polished stone of dismissal. A hobby. 15-hour days, hands cracked open a business plan I've bled over for 3 years. All of it reduced to a little chair hobby. It's the same feeling I got at 12 when I'd spent a month on a science fair project, a detailed model of a suspension bridge, only to have my father shove it into a closet to make room for another one of Gavin's bulky football trophies. I was always the sidebar. Gavin was the main event. The silence stretches and I realize she's waiting for me to argue, to beg, to apologize for asking. I just hang up. The click of the phone ending the call feels like a door slamming shut. The anger is a hot, familiar acid in my throat. But beneath it, there's a new kind of cold. A quiet, hard finality. I stand there for a full minute, just breathing in the sawdust. I don't cry. I don't punch the wall. I pick up my phone again, my thumb hovering over Elias's name. My hands are shaking. He picks up on the first ring. Truck's loaded. You okay? You look like you just saw a ghost. I realize he's standing right by the flatbed watching me. I can't make my voice work. I just shake my head. He's at my side in an instant, his hand on my arm. Lou, what did she say? She said no. I whisper the words, feeling foreign. She said they have to help Gavin. She said my work. She called it a hobby. The word breaks me. The tears come then, hot and furious. Not tears of sadness, but of pure, undiluted rage. Elias pulls me into a hug, his flannel shirt smelling like coffee and plywood. He just holds me for a second, letting me shake. Then he pulls back, and his eyes are dark. Vampires, Lou. He says, his voice low and gravelly. They're vampires, and they're bleeding you dry. He takes a deep breath. To hell with them. You hear me? To hell with them. I'm canceling my blueprint meeting for Tuesday. I'll be there. All day. We'll get a cooler, we'll pack sandwiches, we will do it together. His loyalty is so immediate, so unconditional, it's like a spotlight hitting the dark, selfish hole my family operates in. This is a partner. This is family. His support solidifies something in me. The anger doesn't just simmer. It sharpens. It becomes fuel. You can't cancel your meeting, I say, wiping my face, my voice already stronger. It's for the new build. Watch me, he says, pulling out his phone. That client can wait. Your future can't. He taps the screen, sends a text, and shoves his phone back in his pocket. Done. Now. What's next? You have to pay the vendor fee, right? Let's do it. Let's lock it in. He's right. The non-refundable $500 vendor fee is the last step. It's due today. Paying it would be a promise to myself. A final, to hell with them. I nod, taking a shaky breath. Yeah, okay, let's do it. I walk over to the battered laptop sitting on my workbench, dust covering the keys. I pull open my business bank app. The logo swirls and my account page loads. The balance $50, $112.45. I've been guarding that number, watching it grow, my entire life savings and seed money rolled into one. I click the Pay Vendor link on the Founders Day website. $500 and dollars. I type in my account number, hit submit. The screen flashes red. Payment declined, insufficient funds. What? I say it out loud. Elias looks over. What's wrong? It said insufficient funds. That's impossible. I laugh, a short, nervous sound. It's a mistake. It has to be. A glitch in the system. I hit the refresh button on my bank app. The page reloads. And that's when the world tilts. The sound of the garage, the traffic outside, my own breathing, it all just fades into a high-pitched ringing. The number on the screen isn't just low. It isn't just zero. It's negative. My eyes stare unblinking at the glowing red figures, 112.45. My breath hitches. No, 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 no. I scroll down, my hand shaking so badly I can barely control the mouse pad. And I see it. It's a single line item dated yesterday. A single clean, devastating transaction. Bank transfer. To AG Hardware. Amount $50,000. The sound of my own heartbeat thunders in my ears. A dull, sick drum against the sudden absolute silence of the garage. Elias is saying my name, but his voice sounds like it's coming from underwater. I'm not shaking anymore. I'm frozen. I click. I open the transaction history. I pull up the PDF statements one after another, my breath catching in my throat. It's real. The $50,000. It was everything. It was the grant seed money, yes, but it was also my operating capital for the next 6 months. It was the deposit for a real workshop. It was my personal savings, the buffer I'd built against disaster, the money that let me sleep at night. It was every late night, every splinter, every missed dinner, every drop of sweat I'd poured into this dusty garage. Everything. Gone. My entire life liquefied and siphoned away in a single digital transaction. How? Elias whispers, his hand hovering over my shoulder. Lou, how did they get in? And then I remember. The cold dread settles in my stomach, a block of ice. The account. It wasn't a new account I'd opened for Pearlwood Designs. It was my first account. The Acorn Savers account, the local bank pushed on high schoolers. I opened it when I was 16 to save for college, pumping every dollar from my summer job bagging groceries into it. I needed a cosigner. My father Arthur had signed the paperwork with me. I'd been so proud that day. When I dropped out of college to care for him after his first heart scare, the one Gavin was too busy to help with, I just kept using it. I'd changed the account's purpose, filed a DBA to link Pearlwood Designs to it, but I never, not once in 12 years, thought to take his name off. A 12-year-old signature, a ghost in the machine. A key I'd left in the lock, and he had finally, after all this time, turned it. My father, I say, the words taste like ash. His name was still on the account. I stand up, grabbing my phone. I dial his number. My fingers feel numb. He picks up on the third ring. His voice is weak, watery. Lou, honey, I can explain. He's crying. A soft, pathetic whimper that's meant to break my heart. It just makes me sick. I was going to tell you. Gavin. Oh, Lou, the suppliers. They were going to put a lien on the store. On the house. It was just a loan, honey. Just to hold them off until we got things sorted. Just a loan. A loan? I repeat, my voice flat dead. You don't take a loan, Dad. You ask for one. I hear a muffled sound, a fumbling, and then my mother's voice, sharp and cold as steel, cuts through the line. Don't you dare upset your father. He's been through enough. We needed it. You needed it. I echo, the ice in my veins starting to burn. You needed my life savings. You've been selfish, Louisa. She spits, and the venom is so pure it makes me recoil. Selfish off in your garage with your toys while this family drowns. While your brother works himself to the bone, that money was the least you could do. It's family money. It was just sitting there. It wasn't sitting there. I'm shouting now, the sound ripping out of me. It was my future, the one I was building because you all stole the first one. "Oh, stop it," she shrieks. "The gaslighting is so fast, so practiced, it's almost impressive. We were going to tell you after Gavin got the bank loan we would have paid you back. You've always been so dramatic, just like your grandmother hoarding your pennies, counting every little thing. It's ugly, Louisa. You're lucky we have a way to pay it back at all." The world narrows to a single cold point. The word she just used. "Bank loan," I ask, my voice dropping, all the heat gone, replaced by something else, something terrifyingly calm. "What bank loan, Mom?" There's a sudden, sharp intake of breath on her end. A panicked silence. She knows she's made a mistake. She's strayed from the script. "I just... the loan. From the bank. To save the store." "Gavin's major presentation you couldn't miss," I press. "What bank loan?" "The Founder's Day grant, of course." She snaps, trying to cover her slip with bluster. "He's the only one who can save us. He's the only one who ever..." The line clicks dead. She hung up. I stare at the phone, the silence of the garage rushing back in. The Founder's Day grant. They didn't just steal from me. They stole from me to compete with me. I didn't cry. Not this time. The shock from the phone call, the raw, echoing realization that they were competing against me with my own money, didn't break me. It did something else. It forged the panic into something hard and cold. The hot, frantic betrayal in my chest cooled, solidified, and settled into a terrifying glacial calm. It felt like a chemical change, a permanent hardening of my own emotional bedrock. This is where the Louisa they knew, the one who fixed things, the one who cried, the one who paid for inventory mistakes and absorbed her mother's contempt, died. She died right there on the dusty floor of the garage, next to a laptop displaying a negative balance. And a new one, a colder, clearer one, was born in her place. Elias hadn't moved. He was just watching me, his face pale, his knuckles white on the edge of the workbench. "Lou, what did she mean, the grant?" I turned to him. My voice was flat, hollowed out, empty of all the fire that had been there 10 minutes ago. "They stole it to apply for the Founder's Day grant. They're going to use my $50,000 to stand on that stage and ask for more." He stared, his mind clearly refusing to process the sheer audacity. That's not just theft. It's monstrous." I sank onto my workbench, the cold metal biting through my jeans. The weight of the last 2 years of all the little lies and papered over cracks suddenly became unbearable. "It's not the first time," I whispered. His head snapped up. "What?" This was the secret I'd kept. The shame. The $15,000. 2 years ago, I said, my voice barely audible. The money from my grandmother. It wasn't an inventory mistake. It was a gambling debt. Gavin's. I paid it. I lied to you. I told you I'd invested it in a high-yield CD. I finally looked at him, expecting to see anger or worse, pity. Elias didn't say "I told you so." He didn't get mad that I had lied to protect my family's toxic secret. He just knelt in front of me right there in the sawdust and took my cold, numb hands in his. His eyes were flinty, not with pity, but with a shared rage. "They didn't just steal money, Lou," he said, his voice rough. "They stole your past, and now they're trying to steal your future. This is your life. This isn't a family squabble anymore. This is grand theft. This is war." War. He was right. But wars cost money, and I was negative $112,045. "I can't fight them, Elias," I said, the first crack in my new armor. "I have nothing. They've taken it all. I can't afford a lawyer." "Yes, you do," he said, standing up, pulling me with him. "You have the truth, and you have me." He walked over to the cluttered community bulletin board I'd nailed to the wall, a mess of lumberyard flyers and safety notices. He ripped one down, a simple black and white card. "Remember that guy who helped the tenants on Market Street when their landlord shut off the heat?" The flyer was simple. Ben Carter, Legal Aid Services, Community Law. It felt like a lifeline, thin as thread, but it was there. I made the call. Ben Carter wasn't a shark. He was a guy my age, maybe a few years older, in a worn suit that looked like he'd slept in it. He met me at the diner and his coffee went cold as I laid it all out. The $15,000, the $50,000, the co-signed account, the phone call, the grant. He didn't interrupt. He just took notes on a yellow legal pad, his expression growing more grim with every detail. When I finished, he put his pen down and looked me in the eye. "Okay, Louisa. Here's the reality. Criminally, this is a nightmare." My stomach dropped. "Your father's name is on the account. He'll claim you gave him verbal access, that this was all a family misunderstanding. It's a he said, she said that a DA won't touch. They'll call it a family dispute and show you the door." I felt the hope start to drain away, the cold calm threatening to become despair. "But," he said, leaning in, his voice dropping, "civically, it's a completely different animal. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is fraud. This is a profound breach of fiduciary duty. He was a co-signer, not a co-owner. He had a duty to protect your asset, not liquidate it to pay his son's debts. We can sue. We can sue them for the $50,000 plus the $15,000 plus damages." A spark. "Okay," I said. "Let's do it." Ben held up a hand. "You need to understand what that means. A civil suit isn't quiet. It's not a secret. They will fight back. They will drag your name through the mud. They'll call you vindictive, a bad daughter. It will get very, very public." I looked out the diner window at the town square, at the Founders' Day Fair banner flapping in the breeze. I thought of my mother's voice. A hobby. Selfish. Little chairs. "Good," I said, turning back to Ben. My voice was clear, with no tremor. "They think I'm a hobby. They think I'm a secret they can steal from. Let's make it public." Ben smiled a small, grim smile. "I like you, Louisa." He started packing his briefcase. "Okay. The grant. You're right. You can't win it. You can't even enter. The vendor fee alone." "I don't care about winning it anymore," I said. The new plan was forming cold and clear in my mind. "I care about making sure they don't." "That's a different strategy," Ben said, nodding. "An injunction. We'd have to prove the grant application itself is fraudulent." "It is," I said. "They're going to stand up there and pretend to be a solvent, viable business, and they use stolen money to do it." "Okay," Ben said, standing up. "I'll start digging. This is a house of cards, Louisa. We just need to find the right one to pull." He left. I sat there nursing my cold coffee, the first flicker of power I'd felt all day. This wasn't just defense. This was offense. An hour later, my phone buzzed. A text from Ben. I pulled the public records for the grant. This is bad. The review committee isn't just the town council. It's headed by Robert Vance, the president of the bank. I felt a chill. But it was the next line that stopped my heart. "The same bank that holds the primary loan on your family's store. The bank they're also applying to for the grant." I became a woman obsessed. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, a fleeting privilege that vanished the moment I closed my eyes and saw that negative balance. Food was just fuel that Elias forced me to eat, sandwiches he'd leave on the workbench, which I'd find hours later cold and untouched. The workshop, my sanctuary, was no longer a place of creation. It was a war room. The sharp, clean smell of walnut and pine was buried under the hot plastic smell of my laptop's fan, which ran for 3 days straight. My meticulous artisan's brain, the one that could spot a hairline fracture in a piece of oak or measure a join to a 64th of an inch, was now turned to a different kind of grain, my family's disastrous finances. I didn't just look. I excavated. Ben Carter had shown me where to dig. The county courthouse public records portal, the state tax lien registry, publicly filed judgments. It was all there, a digital breadcrumb trail of desperation. The hardware store wasn't just failing, it was a ghost ship already sunk. The water just hadn't reached the deck yet. They owed everyone: the electrical supplier, the paint distributor, the tool manufacturer. They owed the city for 2 years of back property taxes. It wasn't just bad business, it was a systemic multi-year collapse masked by my mother's arrogance and my father's silence. My investigation moved from the digital world to the physical one. Main Street. I wasn't just Louisa Pearl, the quiet woodworker, anymore. I was a woman with a purpose, a ghost haunting her own town. I went to the diner and Sal, the owner, poured me a coffee without me asking. "You look like hell, kid," he said, wiping the counter. "I'm reviewing my family's books." I said, the lie tasting metallic. He just snorted a harsh, dry sound. "Review. You need an exorcism, not a review. Coffee's on me." He leaned over the counter, his voice low. "Don't tell me I didn't warn you. Your mother, Carol. She waltzes in here, acts like she owns the town, but she hasn't paid her lunch tab in 6 months. Keeps forgetting her wallet. And Gavin?" He shook his head. "He comes in big talk about expansion and modernizing, flashes a roll of cash, but his checks, they bounce. Higher than a rubber ball. Been that way for a year." It was the same story everywhere. At the lumberyard, Rick, the supplier, pulled a thick stack of invoices from under his desk when I asked about AG Hardware. "Gavin Pearl," he spat. "He's all flash, no cash. Full of big talk, but he's been stringing me along for months. Owes me 40 grand. The community, the one my mother was so desperate to impress the audience for their grand family legacy performance, secretly despised them. They weren't pillars, they were a joke, a liability." I was back in the garage staring at a wall of debt notices I'd printed out, the full, staggering scope of their ruin making me dizzy when my phone rang. It was Rick from the lumberyard. "Hey, Louisa," he said, his voice sounding strange, almost confused. "Funny thing, you must have really lit a fire under your brother after you left." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "Gavin, your brother. He just left here not 10 minutes ago, paid off his entire overdue bill." I couldn't breathe. "What? All $40,000? Paid it off, yesterday?" He paid it," I stammered, gripping the workbench. "How?" "Cashier's check," Rick said. Clear as a bell. Said he landed a big investor. Bragged about it all over the yard. Said this was just the beginning. Landed an investor. The words echoed in the empty, dusty garage. I looked at my laptop screen, at the black hole where my $50,000 used to be. "Rick," I said, my voice tight. "When did he say he got this investor?" "Said the deal closed the day before yesterday." "Why?" I hung up. It hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. The $50,000. It wasn't a desperate last-minute grab to pay off suppliers and stop a lien as my father had cried. That was a lie. It was worse. They hadn't stolen the money just to pay their debts. They stole it to qualify for the grant. My money. They had used my money to clean their books, to wipe the slate, to erase the red flags, to stand in front of Robert Vance and the town council and pretend to be a solvent, successful, viable business. It was premeditated. The major presentation my mother was so proud of, the grant application. It was all a meticulous, calculated fraud built on the foundation of my stolen life. That night I knew where he'd be. In the tap room, the only bar in town with top-shelf whiskey. He was always there when he felt rich. I walked in, the smell of stale beer and false confidence hitting me. I saw him instantly. He was at the bar holding court, his voice booming. Arrogant, king of the world. He saw me and his face split into a wide, pitying grin. "Lulu, hey." He slung an arm over the empty stool next to him, patting it. "Heard you had some bank trouble. Real bummer. Tough break." He took a long, slow swig of his whiskey. "Tell you what, once I land this grant, and it's a sure thing, I'll float you a few bucks. Help you get that little hobby back on its feet." I just smiled. It wasn't my smile. It was a cold, sharp, unfamiliar thing that I'd never felt on my own face before. A smile that didn't come anywhere near my eyes. "You do that, Gavin," I said, my voice quiet, but it cut right through the noise of the bar. "I'll see you at the Founders' Day meeting. I wouldn't miss it for the world." He laughed, a loud, dismissive, braying sound. Sure thing, sis. Don't be late. He turned back to his drink, the conquering hero already spending his prize money. He had no idea. He had no idea he was a dead man walking. The Founders' Day town hall was packed. It felt like the entire population of the county was crammed into the old auditorium, sitting on folding chairs and fanning themselves with pamphlets. The air was thick with the smell of old wood-varnish floor wax and a cloying performative civic pride. This was our town's biggest event, the one time a year we all pretended to be a unified, prosperous community. At the head table under the town seal sat the review committee. And at its center was Robert Vance, president of the bank, a man whose tailored suit probably cost more than my first car. He was the king of this town, and today he was holding court. Elias and I found seats in the back row. My heart was a cold, heavy stone in my chest, not pounding, just present. He squeezed my hand. "You ready?" he whispered. I just nodded. I wasn't ready. I wasn't scared. I just was. I was an inevitability. In the front row, I saw them. My family. Arthur Carroll and Gavin. They were dressed in their Sunday best. My father in a suit I didn't recognize, my mother in a bright blue dress, her hair perfectly coiffed. And Gavin. He was glowing, soaking in the attention, shaking hands, patting backs. The golden boy, the savior, about to get his crown. "And now for our final grant proposal," the town manager announced, "Mr. Gavin Pearl for the revitalization of AG Hardware." Gavin strode to the podium, all charisma and bright false smiles. He launched into his speech, and it was a masterpiece of deception. He spoke of revitalizing Main Street, of community first, of honoring the legacy his father built. He painted a picture of a struggling, noble family business, the bedrock of the town, fighting to adapt to a new era. He was slick. He was believable. He talked about the future, about new jobs, about bringing prosperity back to the square. The crowd was eating it up. They nodded, they applauded. When he finished by talking about his unwavering family support, I saw my mother Carol dab at her eyes with a tissue, weeping with pride. She looked right at him, her face a mask of pure, blind adoration. Gavin took his bow. Vance smiled, clapping politely. "Thank you, Mr. Pearl. A very compelling proposal." He shuffled his papers. "Before we move to the committee's deliberation, we have one final item. A public comment from another local business owner, Ms. Louisa Pearl." A ripple of confusion went through the room. Pearl. Another one. I saw my mother's head snap around her eyes, searching the crowd. Gavin's smile wavered, a flicker of confusion. My father, Arthur, just seemed to shrink, his shoulders caving in. I stood up. Elias gave my hand one last hard squeeze. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps echoing in the sudden curious silence. I was holding a single manila folder. My hands weren't shaking. I reached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out. I didn't look at my family. I looked at the crowd. I looked at Sal from the diner, at Rick from the lumberyard. Then I looked directly at Robert Vance. "Good afternoon. My name is Louisa Pearl. I'm the owner of Pearlwood Designs." My voice was clear, amplified by the mic, every syllable sharp and clean. "I was going to apply for the Founders' Day grant this year. I had a plan to expand, to hire apprentices, to build a business that this town could be proud of. But I can't." I paused. The room was dead silent. I could feel my family's eyes burning into the back of my head. "I can't apply," I continued, "because last Tuesday my business account, which held $50,000 of my life savings and seed money, was emptied." A collective gasp. A murmur. I saw my mother freeze her hand halfway to her mouth. I saw Gavin's face drain of all color, his smile collapsing. "It was emptied," I said, my voice dropping, but losing none of its edge, "by my father, Arthur Pearl." I still didn't look at him. "He used a co-signing signature he put on my account when I was 16. He transferred every cent to AG Hardware. It was not a loan, it was a theft." I opened the folder. I took out the bank statement, the one showing the $50,000 transfer, and I placed it on the overhead projector. The red negative balance the line item transfer to AG Hardware was blown up 10 feet tall on the screen behind Robert Vance. The room erupted. It was a wave of shock of outrage. Mr. Vance. I said, my voice cutting through the noise, and I finally looked right at him. His face was no longer polite. It was a mask of cold fury. Gavin Pearl's application is based on fraud. He claims to be financially solvent. He's not. He solved his debts by stealing my entire livelihood. I reached back into the folder and pulled out the rest. I have here the public tax liens from the city. I have the letters from other businesses he's cheated, like Rick's Lumberyard, whose $40,000 debt was paid with my money. And I have the bank statement showing where my future went. I stacked the papers neatly on the podium. I'm not here to ask for the grant. I'm not here as a victim. I am here as a member of this community, and I'm asking you to stop a thief from being crowned a town hero. The chaos was instant, absolute. My mother's voice ripped through the air, a shrill, hysterical shriek. Lies! She's lying! She's a vindictive, hateful girl! Tell them, Arthur! Tell them she's lying! Gavin, his face purple with rage, lunged for the podium, his hand outstretched to grab the papers, to grab me. You bitch! He roared. But Elias was already there. He'd moved from the back row like a shot, a solid wall of muscle between me and my brother, his hand flat on Gavin's chest, shoving him back. Don't you touch her! Robert Vance shot to his feet, his face like thunder. He grabbed the gavel and slammed it down, the sound cracking like a gunshot. Enough! He roared. Security, and someone get the sheriff in here, now! The room went quiet, a new terrified silence. Vance pointed at Gavin, then at my parents. You three, you will not move. Then his eyes found me. His expression was unreadable, but his voice was pure steel. This meeting is adjourned. Miss Pearl, you'll be coming with me. The side room Vance led us to was the town manager's office. It smelled like stale coffee and old paper. The shouting from the auditorium had faded, replaced by the sound of a deputy's walkie-talkie squawking in the hall. It was just me, Elias, Ben Carter, and Robert Vance. Ben, who had slipped in during the chaos, looked like he'd just won the lottery. Elias stood protectively behind my chair. I just sat, my hands flat on my knees, the manila folder in my lap. Vance hadn't sat down. He was pacing in front of the window, his back to us, his suit jacket bunched in his fists. They've been lying to me for 6 months, he said, his voice a low, controlled rumble. 6 months. We had a restructured loan agreement pending, contingent on this grant. They used you. He spun around, his eyes locking on mine. They used your money to falsify their solvency report. To me, to my bank. He looked at Ben. This isn't just a breach of fiduciary duty. This is bank fraud. That's what we believe, Mr. Vance. Ben said, all business. The $40,000 payment to the lumber supplier was a material misrepresentation of their financial state intended to mislead your committee. You're damn right it was, Vance snapped. He picked up the phone on the desk. Get me the sheriff, not the deputy. The sheriff. He waited. Bill, it's Vance. I'm in the manager's office. I want Gavin Pearl arrested for fraud. Now. And I want Arthur and Carol Pearl detained as accessories. Yes, I'm sure. I'll sign the complaint myself. He slammed the phone down. Outside the door, we heard a new commotion. My mother's voice rising in a desperate wail. You can't do this. We are respected. Arthur. Arthur, do something. It was cut short. The story was spreading. The whispers were already cementing into town history. The fall of the Pearl family. Vance took a deep, steadying breath, adjusting his tie. His banker's mask was back on. As of this afternoon, AG Hardware is in default of its loan covenants. The fraud invalidates their entire structure. We're foreclosing. Tomorrow morning, the bank is seizing the property. He then looked at me. His gaze was intense, appraising. You, he said. You've got guts, Ms. Pearl. I've been in this business for 30 years. I've seen liars and I've seen fools. You're neither. Ben cleared his throat. Mr. Vance, we've also brought Louisa's original business plan, the one she intended to submit for the grant. He slid a neatly bound document across the desk. Vance picked it up. He actually read it. Not all of it, but he flipped through the pages studying the projections, the designs, the cost analysis. He spent a full minute on it. "This is excellent," he said, his voice flat. "Thorough, realistic." He closed it. "The Founders' Day grant is tainted. The committee is dissolved. But the bank," he said, "is in the business of investing in this community. And this," he tapped my plan, "is a good investment." My heart, which had been a cold stone, gave a single painful thump. "The bank is prepared to offer you a business loan," Vance said, "for the full $50,000 at prime, but not just the money. The property we're seizing, the hardware store, it has a large attached warehouse in the back. Hasn't been used in years. It's perfect for a wood shop." I couldn't speak. I just looked at him. Elias put his hands on my shoulders, his grip tight. We accept," I finally managed to say. "Good," Vance said, offering a curt nod. "My office will have the paperwork ready Monday." When we walked out of that office, the hall was packed. But the people weren't hostile. They were watching. As we walked toward the exit, a few people started to clap. Just a few at first, then more. It was a slow, rising tide of applause. I saw Sal from the diner. He gave me a sharp nod. "Lunch is on me, kid," he yelled. "For life." Rick from the lumberyard was talking to the sheriff, pointing at a fuming, handcuffed Gavin being led out a side door. Rick saw me and raised his chin in a salute. He and the other suppliers, the ones my family had cheated, were now the star witnesses in the state's case against my brother. The community I thought I was on the outside of the one that had only ever seen me as a quiet shadow was embracing me. They saw the resilience. They respected the fight. They were rallying. My parents were gone. A deputy told me they'd been taken to the station for their own safety as much as for questioning. They lost the store. They lost the house, which I knew had been leveraged against the store's loans. They were social pariahs. In 2 hours, they had gone from town legacy to town scandal. They were utterly publicly ruined. Weeks later, the dust had settled. Gavin was out on bail, his trial date set. My parents were living in a weekly rental motel on the highway, their shame a tangible thing. I was in the warehouse. My warehouse. It was huge, full of light from high clerestory windows, the smell of old grease and metal giving way to the new clean scent of pine. I had the loan. I had the keys. I was sweeping, pushing a 2-foot-wide broom across the concrete floor, clearing out decades of grime. I was covered in sweat and cobwebs, and I had never been happier. It was a beginning. As I swept near the rattling metal roll-up door, a white envelope slid underneath it. I stopped. I picked it up. It wasn't stamped. It had just been dropped off. My name was on the front in a familiar shaky script. I opened it. It was a single sheet of notebook paper torn from a spiral. It was from my father. "Louisa," it began. "I don't ask you to forgive me. I don't know what to say. I just want you to know you were right. I was a coward. I let them poison me. I let them break the best thing I ever had. I am so sorry." 6 months later, the winter sun streams through the high clerestory windows, illuminating moats of fresh milled cedar. The air is bright, clean, and smells of progress. The old, greasy metal of the warehouse is gone, replaced by whitewashed walls and organized tool racks. Outside, a new professionally painted sign hangs over the polished front door, the elegant script reading, "Pearlwood Designs." It's no longer a garage. It's no longer a dream. It's an institution. The workshop is loud, alive with the sound of creation. I have 2 apprentices, high school kids from the shop class, Leo and Maya. They're eager, focused, and I pay them well. I watch Leo carefully sanding a dovetail joint, a look of intense concentration on his face. In the far corner, the sound of a nail gun pops. Elias is there, building me a real office, a small glass-walled room where I can meet clients and sketch designs. He winks at me over the frame. He's building his life right alongside mine. Today the workshop is unusually quiet in the afternoon. Robert Vance of all people is here with the new Founders' Day committee. They're holding a small plaque and there's a photographer from the local paper. Vance clears his throat, smiling. Louisa, on behalf of the town's business association, we'd like to present you with this year's New Business of the Year award. The plaque is heavy in my hands. It's not a grant. It's not a loan. It's an acknowledgement. It's respect. After they leave, I stand alone in the quiet shop. This is my life. It's not just about building furniture. It's about building a future one I own, one that no one can sign away with a 12-year-old signature. The financial burden is gone, replaced by a manageable loan and a healthy ledger. But that's not the real freedom. The real freedom is the silence in my head, the suffocating, choking weight of my family's expectations, their disappointments, their bottomless parasitic need. It's gone. The guilt, the shame, the feeling of always being less than Gavin, of always being the one who had to fix things. It has evaporated. I'm not their daughter anymore, not in that way. I'm not their emergency fund. I'm not their secret. I am just me. Louisa Pearl, owner of Pearlwood Designs. I am my own person. That evening, I stop at the grocery store on the way home. It's Tuesday, just a normal Tuesday. I'm pushing my cart, thinking about what to make for dinner when I see them. The transformation is so shocking, I almost stop walking. My mother, Carol, is at register 3. She's wearing the bright blue vest of a store employee, her hair pulled back in a severe, stringy ponytail. Her face, once round with smug satisfaction, is pinched bitter and etched with a permanent weary anger. She's bagging groceries, her movements jerky and resentful, slamming a box of cereal down. And then I see my father. He's outside pushing a long line of rattling carts in the light rain, his shoulders hunched against the cold. He's wearing a soaked, neon-yellow rain slicker. He looks older, tired, and 10 years broken. But as he turns, I see his face. The weakness is gone, the haunted look of a man living a lie. He just looks quiet, peaceful in a strange, hollowed-out way. He sees me through the glass door. He stops pushing the carts. Our eyes lock. He doesn't look away in shame. He just nods. A single, slow, deliberate dip of his chin. It's an acknowledgement. It's an apology. It's a concession. It's the first honest thing that has ever passed between us. In that nod, I see the deep, abiding shame, but I also see what I never saw before: respect. My mother looks up, following his gaze. She sees me. Her face contorts a flash of the old familiar hatred. She turns her back to me, a stiff final rejection. And I feel nothing. Not a spark of anger. Not a flicker of pity. Not even the cold, satisfying sting of triumph. It's just a quiet, clean slate finality. They are no longer my monsters. They are no longer my responsibility. They are no longer the heavy weight that defines my life. They are just two people in a grocery store, a cashier and a cart attendant working a Tuesday night shift. I pay for my things and walk out to my truck. I don't look back. I drive back to the workshop. I forgot to lock up. I walk inside, the new wood smell welcoming me home. I flip on the lights, illuminating the beautiful, clean space I built. My space. On the workbench is a new block of raw cherry wood, its grain a deep, rich red. I pick it up. It's heavy, solid. I run my thumb over the rough edge, smelling the faint, sweet scent of the wood. I carry it over to the lathe, my lathe, and lock it into place. I pick up a chisel, the steel cold and perfect in my hand. I brace myself, my body settling into the familiar, powerful stance. Then I flick the switch. The machine whirs to life, a steady, powerful hum that fills the room. It's the sound of progress. It's the sound of my future. The wood begins to turn. And just like that, Louisa finally closed the door on her, past her future, now truly her own. What did you think of the stand she took? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We read every single comment. Subscribe for more stories of vindication. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.